This week on the show, if you are a highly sensitive person, if you are empathic, or if you just feel like the world has been too much, this episode is for you. My conversation with David Waldas, the founder of the Aligned Living System and the author of the book Insight, Influence, and Flow, a guide for business professionals. We've got so many great insights, things that will really open your mind and give you a new perspective into the world that we're operating in today, especially from a place of protecting your peace, minding your energy when the world's got plenty of it that it tries to put on you. So here's an episode to get centered, to feel aligned, and to enjoy. Thanks for joining us this week. It's time to flip the script on stress and learn how to thrive today and throughout your days. Join me for inspiration and interviews with folks who are shining their light in the world in the areas of positive mindset, health, and well-being. I'm your host, Susi Vine. Let's get happified. Welcome back. I am thrilled to have you with me for a conversation that I know is going to be very insightful. I am joined this week by David Waldas, a gifted psychic channel and globally recognized leader in holistic personal development and transformative coaching. With a deep understanding of energy and consciousness, David helps individuals achieve alignment and flow through his proven methodology, the Aligned Living System. And we just found out we used to be neighbors. So welcome to the show, David. So happy to have you with me today.
Well, thanks. Yeah, just down the road from you in Sauna Beach. That's fun.
Yes, yes. And Encinitas certainly has given rise to some very inspired and aligned ideas and people. So I knew when we were connected initially that this was going to be a great topic because it's not one that I've had the opportunity to really dive into as I've been coaching, and of course, along with coaching and doing my own personal work and exploration, spiritual development and intuition has been growing alongside of that. And so maybe
Sure.
that's a place to start. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be the place where you are and serving the people who you love to work with today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on and honored to be here. It's funny, like growing up, I was just a really weird kid, like ADD, ADHD, dyslexic. I probably would be put on the spectrum somewhere if it was in the know back then. And so my teachers didn't really know what to do with me. I just kind of fumbled along. I had this high IQ, and I always joked that like I knew the answers, but I had no idea what the question was, which was really annoying to my teachers. And it continued through high school, and I graduated like 128 out of 134 kids, I think, in my high school graduating class. And finally, I started to figure out around 19 or 20. I finally got diagnosed at that point with ADHD, and they gave me Adderall, Ritalin back then. And I'm not a big fan of that, but it taught me how to live in this ordinary world that other people are living in. And I just started becoming very mainstream. I went on, got my master's degree in education, and was a teacher for 12 years and a soccer coach. Then on my 30th birthday, I got invited to a psychic fair. I'd never done anything like that before. And I didn't realize that that was part of my world because my world was just my world. I walk into this big room, and it's like probably 50 different psychics spread out around this huge ballroom. And I'm walking around, and there's this one woman, Sandy, sitting there. And I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to see her. It's just obvious. It didn't occur to me that was not a normal thing to just know that was the lady. And I sat down with her, and she started shuffling her tarot cards and laying them out in front of me. And she goes, oh, I see you're planning this big move across the country. Not everybody's happy with this, though, are they? But you need to do what's right for you. And I was like, how does she know this? And then she said, that job you've been wanting is coming through in the next 2 weeks. Then as we were finishing, she goes, oh, sweetie, I like this one. I'm hearing the same gift that I have. It's going to open up for you too, and quick. So literally the next day I was driving over to realtor's office, and I've been trying to sell the house, and the realtor had been just pulling like weird kind of funky things. And we were like, this just isn't working. So I've been wanting to terminate the contract with her, and she'd been blowing me off, ghosting me for about a week. And so I'm like, I'm just showing up at her office. I'm going to get this taken care of. So I was in the turn lane signal on. I'm like all just worked up and like, I'm just going to go get this done. And I hear this subtle voice, not now. And totally ignored it. Like, wasn't even sure I heard it. And then it was, not now. And I'm like, I heard it for sure that time, but I was like, I'm just taking care of this. Nothing's going to stop me from getting this done. and then not now. And I was like, oh shit, okay. And
That's
that stopped me
funny.
from getting it done. I pulled back out, went home. About an hour later, I'm sitting on the couch and I hear now, like totally new to all this. I'm like, what? Get in the car, drive back over. As I'm opening the front door to the realtor's office, I see her walking through the back door simultaneously. She grabs the paperwork, hands it to me, I sign it, and contract's terminated. And I'm thinking, man, this world that Sandy opened up for me, I like life's gonna be easy from here on out. Like I have the superpower now. And anybody that's used their intuition to drive their life knows that it's not an easy street. It's not the
I had
easy
a
path.
suspicion there was a punchline in that. It's all easy now.
Oh, life is set, right? Like I got the magic power now. I'll just swerve through all the obstacles. But life instead, your intuition steers you towards whatever your next growth point is. And my life became all about personal development and spiritual development at that point. And then I ended up working as a psychic and a healer and kind of moved out of teaching at that point. And then in 2016, so gosh, that was almost 9 years ago, I was driving on I-70 through Vail, Colorado. And if you've ever driven that stretch, it's really swervy roads. And just before you get to the pass, as we were coming around one of the last corners, I saw this huge, beautiful rainbow coming down. And I'm like, it looks like it's coming into the road. And as we came around the corner, sure enough, it was. And we drove right into it, and the whole car filled with these refracted rainbows. I remember looking at my daughters, Olivia and Ava were in the back seat, and they're like, "What?" Just like all of us covered. And there was a couple driving the car next to us. Same thing, hands up in the air, just blown away. And I don't know how they were driving or even how I was driving, because in that moment, all of a sudden, I just popped into a different state of consciousness where that psychic, intuitive channel part of me was right there. But for the first time, at the same time, was also this fully integrated, like the business person and the father and the grounded, solid entrepreneur person. And I always jump back and forth between those two worlds. And in that moment, I just integrated them. Oh, I didn't integrate them, they became integrated. And I got this download of information of how to take other people there, how to teach them how to stabilize off of themselves internally and not get so floaty by and pushed around by everybody else's energy, as all of us empaths have experienced in our lives, but to come home to ourselves. And that became aligned living. It took me about 3 months, 6 months to unpack it and turn it into the basics of the system that's evolved over the last 9 years into what is the aligned living system, which is what I work with people now and help them create that same level of consciousness and alignment and clarity of themselves without all the interference of all the energetics of everybody else in this world that maybe doesn't have our best interest in mind or has their own emotions or whatever is going on, and that we get lost in that sea. And so bring it back to that quiet inner space. And so that's my origin story.
Oh, that's amazing. I wish we could all just aim for a rainbow, drive through, and have instant clarity and alignment.
It took me a long time to tell that story because I'm like, this is so hokey. But then as I started telling the story, people were like, wow, yeah. I'm like, really? You believe me? I'm like, I don't believe me. But it was just it was such a crazy experience. And rainbows have often been a thing for me where they'll show up and they'll be an experience. And so it's, yeah, pretty profound.
Amazing. Well, and I think there's no coincidence. There's synchronicities and there's those divine sparks. And when you're
Yeah.
open to them and willing to give credit when they come through, then you can really have access to what they're offering you, which it sounds like if you weren't quite ready before that, that was the day they flipped the switch.
And there's been a bunch of evolutions of it too. It felt for a long time like this huge obligation that landed on me. And I didn't really want it. I was like, I'm just trying to do my gifts, and I wanted to be the guy behind the guy that I could help other people. And I kept getting pushed out into the spotlight and pushed out. And I know I'm finally on board with that. I was actually writing this morning. I'm like, I think I'm finally at that point in my life where my will and God's will actually aligned, instead of feeling like he's kicking my ass and pushing me into all these things that like, really this now? But I've reached a point where I'm like, oh, what I want is what he wants. And I can feel the cohesiveness of it, which is really beautiful. And I think a lot of people are feeling that in this time right now in history where we're just getting locked in on our purpose, and all the confusion and all the stuff that's maybe been in the way, or our own growth that we hadn't worked through yet. It's such an exciting time right here, right now.
Truly, truly. And before I go five different directions off of what you just said, because I want to go back to what you said earlier about that intuition,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always just give us the answers that we're looking for, but sometimes it leads us to the lessons that it's in time and on time for us to be having that experience.
Yeah, yeah. And it's such an interesting thing as an empath too, because we get two layers of things. We get our intuitive knowing, which is coming from somewhere divine, right? Or a higher self, however you want to look at it. And that guidance is always about taking us, steering us to where we're supposed to be. I would say that the universe is either going to give you this cattle prod to push you where you're going, or it's going to give you these miracles that align for you. And it's both coming from the same place. The number of brick walls I ran full speed into, thinking that it was the opening to my greatest wishes coming true, and realizing it was just the next thing I needed to learn. But we can't differentiate because it is all just this incredible purpose to get us where we're going, and the cattle prods we needed to spark us to get on track. And eventually, all the cohesiveness just keeps growing and growing.
Yeah, I really do think there's a lot of surrender that comes along with the idea that we are in time and on time, that we're
Mm-hmm.
perfectly imperfect. And as
Mm-hmm.
much as we wish we were somewhere else by now and we're
Yeah.
not meeting
Mm-hmm.
that benchmark or matching that person, we're
Yeah.
exactly where we're supposed
Absolutely.
to be
Absolutely.
getting those lessons. So,
Yeah, we look around and go, "What a mess! This is where I'm supposed to be in this mess, really?" But we can, I think we can all look at our lives and look backwards and go, "It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect." It reminds me of this friend of mine who's since passed, but he used to lead treks, and there's this video of him walking up this mountain in the rain, and he's being filmed. They're like, "Jeff, how's your day going?" He goes, This is going to be great when I look back on it." I forget his exact quote, but it was like, in hindsight, we always look back and go, "God, what a beautiful experience." But during the experience, we're like, "Shit, this is a lot."
we are really slogging through.
Yeah, yeah. But the other point I wanted to just drop in too is when we do use our intuition to drive us, I think it can be really challenging for empaths because we pick up so much information that to differentiate between an intuitive knowing and an empathic read.
Hmm.
I use an example of this is I had a friend of mine who had done something that just really wasn't cool. Like, it was really frustrating to me and affected me in a pretty profound way. And I could feel her wanting to reach out. Like, she was upset and she was trying to get me to let her off the hook. But it didn't register to me that all of a sudden I just felt her in this panic mode. And I got this message of there's something really wrong with her. And I picked up my phone and I was like, oh, I should text her and check on her, even though she had just done this thing that I was so upset about. And I stopped for a minute. I'm like, this is just information that I'm receiving. This isn't intuitive knowing. This is me feeling her energy kind of freaked out and come to terms with her behavior. And I wanted to instantly resolve it because it felt, since it come through this knowing, through this empathic gift, it felt like it was a message from spirit. But it's the same as if she called me and said, "Hey, are you ready to forgive me?" I would be like, "No, I'm absolutely not." But because it came through this empathic knowing, it made me feel like there was some divine element to it. And I caught myself before I texted her back. I'm like, this is just me feeling where she's at, and it's not something I need to resolve for her. And after that happened, like, I realized how often we do that as empaths. We maybe have a challenge between knowing what's an intuitive knowing that's really going to guide us and put us on our path, and what is requests from other people or desires that we feel, but because they come through that similar format, we think that they're some divine message, but they're really us being manipulated, by other people sometimes.
That's so powerful and really, I think, important
Mm-hmm.
for sensitive people, for empaths to recognize because we do, I think, in my evolution, such as it is, but embracing my place in the process, we want to tune into those intuitive hits and we want to make the most of those. We want to invite more of them. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
listening, I'm tuning in, I'm ready to act on it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that awareness is really profound and inviting people to get curious. Is this
Mm-hmm.
really divine guidance or is it I'm open because I'm curious and I'm receiving messages? It doesn't have to be my message.
Yeah, it could be somebody else's urgency or somebody else's discomfort or whatever it is. And I mean, when we look at our lives and how we make decisions as empaths, when we're open like that, we abandon ourselves all the time. And we don't mean to, but what happens is other people's urgency, other people's discomfort is stronger than our own because we feel it so deeply. And for most empaths, what's happening around them, what's happening with other people's emotions, shows up stronger than their own. And then we become responsible for everybody else's because if they're not okay, we're not okay. And so we end up abandoning ourselves all the time to help make them okay. We stop what we're doing and go, oh, like, you're having a hard time. I can feel that. And there's absolutely a part where we care about and love these people, but there's also a part where I can't be okay until you're okay. And we end up doctoring up everybody else's emotions all the time and getting hijacked, and it makes it so hard for us to get done what we're really here to do, because our energy just gets, we take the bait, we get, and we end up giving ourselves away and abandoning who we are and what we're really doing. And so that is a lot of the work I do, is teach people how to align here and go, now this is 90% of what I'm experiencing, and that's 10%. I still want to know it, but I don't want it to be contagious. I don't want it to be stronger than who I am. I have a story to tell on myself. I realize I'm sitting here with this big smile on my face now as I say this, but I remember this woman saying to me, she's like, "Gosh, you smile all the time. You must be the happiest person in the world." And I was like, I'm happy, but I realized that when she said that, I'm like, I think I just smile at everybody because then they smile back and it makes them a lot easier to be around. And I realized, I'm like, I think I have a really manipulative smile, and I didn't mean to. It was just like, I realized if I smile, other people smile and they feel good all of a sudden. And now I don't have to manage their emotions because they're in a good place. But it was just such a funny coping mechanism of like, and I still smile a lot, but it's for a different reason now, because I don't need other people to be as happy as I want to be.
I think that's a really profound insight. And as the peacekeeper, the mood lifter of the family, I can definitely relate. And you're talking about how even early on these patterns develop, trying
Mm-hmm.
to ease our emotional state by raising the emotions of those around us. It sounds like a coping mechanism maybe
Yeah.
HSPs, highly sensitive people,
Yeah.
adopt really early on. Do you think that's
Absolutely.
true?
Absolutely. And I would say it's like bailing the ocean with a 5 gallon bucket, because, it just keeps running back in, because as soon as one person's emotions are in check, somebody else comes in, and like we can't resolve it. It's a never ending, it's just placeholders around us that we're giving away our energy and power to. And the other ironic part is when we learn to feel ourselves more deeply than we're feeling other people and stabilize off that place, their energy stops being contagious. And so we can be there for them so much more deeply than we could before. And it's kind of hard to wrap our head around that until we start to experience it. But hands down, I've seen that with every client. They're like, I can't believe I can actually be there more for people when I'm not managing their emotions and when I'm not running them through me. Like I can still feel them, but it's like 10%. And I didn't realize I could be more powerful than other people's emotions within myself. And now I can be there. It's like, imagine being a nurse, but you're having a compromised immune system. It's kind of like how for most of the HSPs and empaths experience the world is like, we're just, oh, I got this now. I caught angry, I caught sad, I caught all the emotions that are available, versus I get to stabilize. And I think it's so shocking when I start working with clients when they go, gosh, I didn't realize how loud energetically and emotionally the outer world was. And when I experience this quiet, which we basically do a very mechanical process with the way we structure our energy and align it with ourselves, and don't put those sensors on there, those kind of security cameras that we're running all the time, that are part of our emotional body that can feel people's emotions. And we place them on ourselves primarily, like our world just gets super silent and quiet inside. And you'd think that most empaths would be really into meditation and that kind of thing, but for most of us, it's in HSPs, it's really hard for us to meditate because the world's so loud. It's always popping us off of distracting us. And so when we can quiet that world, all of a sudden we can meditate, we can quiet things in here, we can hear ourselves, because the outer world's not louder than our inner world anymore.
Ooh, fascinating. I love that. This is definitely a conversation I think people can get some if they listen to it a couple of times over.
There's always
But
a
there's
lot
so
of
much ground I want to
information.
cover. I can't reiterate everything that you say. So one of the aspects of your work, as you mentioned, is helping empaths get aligned so that it's easier for them to navigate this world, to not be as porous and absorbent of everything that's around them. You just mentioned, a bit of it is that kind of practical, functional
Mhm.
approach to grounding energy, if you
Yeah.
will, or give
Mhm.
us a little bit of an idea about that. How can sensitive people start to tune in and bring up that 10% that can be drowned out by all of that external input?
I think part of it is just recognizing what our empathic gift is. And people think it's the ability to feel others deeply, which absolutely can be applied that way, but it's this sixth sensory, extrasensory ability to feel things deeply. And so whatever we're placing our emotional body on, that where that gift is, that's what we're feeling deeply. If we place it on the outer world, that's what we feel deeply. If we place it on ourselves, that's what we feel deeply. And so we don't lose the depth of experience when we place it on ourselves. We actually get that same depth of experience we have to feel other people. We feel ourselves with that. And it's really remarkable. And the way that it's been shown to me as I've gotten the channels around this is that every five sensory baby made sense of the world by its five senses: tasting and touching and smelling and seeing and hearing, and put everything in their mouth, and they all of their awareness goes out into their surroundings. And those of us that had that extrasensory ability, that high sensitivity, that empathic gift, it's really a sixth sensory, it's a multidimensional ability. We also place that outside. And we said, who am I? Who is this world? How do I make sense of this? And we just put it on out there. It didn't ever occur to us that it didn't have to be stuck out there. We can actually take it, separate it from the rest of our electromagnetic field, from our energy field, and bring it home and turn it on inside of ourselves. And the moment we do that, we just have a different experience of being. And so this work is instantaneous, the initial change, because it is that mechanical. If we turned on a microphone outside, the sound coming in and playing in here, of course, that's what's going to happen. And so we shouldn't be surprised if we take that microphone and put it inside of ourselves, that we're hearing ourselves now. And it literally is that simple. And so there's a process we go through where we kind of do a hard reset on ourselves, because we're so corded with everything in our surroundings. And when we're corded with our surroundings, it just gets easy access to us, free access to us. And so we basically just turn off all of those cords and drop into what I call the consciousness lock, which is basically based on the idea of an airlock. So it's like a way to move from one level of consciousness to the other, from an external consciousness to an internal consciousness. And then we stay in there for a minute, let this silence come in that we're not used to. And then we open up inside, and that silence stays, but now we have this jump in our intuition. We have this alignment with ourselves and this feeling with ourselves. And I think we can do a really quick exercise that'll give us just a sample of what that feels like. Does that feel like fun to you to
Yeah,
do a little
absolutely.
exercise?
That sounds
Yeah.
great.
All right. And so we won't do the whole consciousness lock, but I just want us to get a sense of what's happening. And so I always like to put my hands out with my palms open, have them represent that emotional body, like the cameras and microphones that are out there reading the world. And we can just take them and just push the world back a little bit. And as we do, we often start to notice, like, oh, there's just a little bit more space around me. And then we can actually turn these off. And this isn't our end game to stay turned off, but we want to do a hard reset. And so if we were to just take our hands and close them into fists and bring them down to our lap and let that bubble seal over the top of the head, over the face, back of the head, heart, back of the heart, all the way down below the feet. Just notice what happens when we let go of that outer world and don't let it stream through us anymore. So what do you notice as we drop into this place that I call the consciousness lock?
I wouldn't say that it's silent, but the sounds aren't as intense. There's a buffer, there's a distance.
You know what often happens is the environmental noise, like the clock ticking or the heat running, becomes louder to our senses, but the energetic noise just doesn't hit us in the same way. Yeah. And then from here, we can open up inside of ourselves. So if we take those hands still closed in a fist and put one over our heart, one over our solar plexus, and we open up our palms and just see ourselves opening up into that center channel, that connection to source or God, however you want to see it, through the top of the head and grounding into the earth. And we just start to have another experience of being. Go, ah. And from this place, if we'll just take a minute to experience it and maybe even open our eyes, all of a sudden the world's a lot further away from us. It's a lot more space between us and our surroundings. And it's even, you may even notice that on the camera here, right? There's a lot of distance between us and we still may get a really strong feeling for each other, but we're not in each other's energy in the same way.
That's such a fast and powerful technique and exercise.
Yeah.
It makes me think of when you're going into an aviary or a butterfly garden, right? Go in through the first gate and then you're in a chamber,
Yeah.
the little safety zone, and then you go into that inner and you have access to everything
Yeah.
that is inside of there.
Yeah, and that is a lock, right? Like the space shuttle has an airlock on it, or space station. Same thing. Like there's a little pod that is sealed to the pressurized cabin. They open up to the vacuum of space. The astronaut comes in, seals it behind him, pressurizes the airlock, and then can open up to go in. So that's basically what we're doing is we're creating. That's where the term consciousness lock channeled in from. I'm like, consciousness lock. What does that mean? I'm like, oh, like an airlock. And so we're basically going, oh, I'm internal. And so there's a bunch of tools, like the Aligned Living System is like really a 10-week program learning how to stabilize and live from that place where we've essentially reversed the feedback loop, right? Any of us that are highly sensitive or empaths, we know we walk into a room and the room comes at us, right? Or we have a conversation and that conversation comes at us. And we go, oh shit, how am I going to engage with this? But when we start internally, we go, here I am. This is who I am. I'm walking into this room and I'm bringing me. and I'm going to see how the room responds to me. And now the feedback loop is reversed. We're actually bringing us to any situation, feeling our impact, as opposed to going, all right, here I go. I'm going in. Here it comes. As most of us have experienced for years and know that empath or highly sensitive person experience.
Truly. And instead of bracing ourselves,
We bring
and
ourselves.
that's so empowering to be reading the way that our energy impacts the room, not only
Yeah.
taking in everybody's energy.
Yeah. Because we're so used to going, how do I survive this? How do I manage this? How am I going to be okay? And when we reverse the feedback loop, we're not going, how am I going to be okay? We go, how am I managing the room? Not how am I managing myself so I'm okay in the room. How am I managing the room? And it's not about trying to make it everything we want, but we notice like our energy lifts people. All of a sudden it shifts them to a brighter facet of themselves. And we all have different ways we can show up, different facets of ourselves. And when our energy is clean and clear and broadcasting this, it shifts people into a better version of themselves, to a higher consciousness and a higher thinking and a more positive perspective. And we start to have different experiences and more synchronicities and heightened intuition and all the things that come with it.
Now, do you, in your aligned living system, in the program that you've created, do you work exclusively with empathic people, or what sort of people do you find
Yeah,
that are
yeah.
drawn into this work with you?
Yeah, it's all over the place because it's people that want to be more effective. And we all have our hangups, right? Whether we consider ourselves to be highly sensitive or empathic or not, like the world, we feel the world and it comes at us. And we try to manage ourselves in that, and we try to bring our gifts. And anybody that really wants to express themselves and really get deeply in touch with themselves, that's who my clients are. And so I work with a lot of high performers. I'm working with more and more kind of well-known people that already have these big platforms that want to take themselves to the next level. And I think any of us that have started to generate a following, like it's intense because all of a sudden there's all this awareness on us and we feel it. Like it's, you see so many people that want to be stars or famous and they become famous and they just implode. Like what it feels like to have a lot of awareness on you, even just some awareness, is an incredibly intense experience. And I work with people that are even just, whether they're just an empath that wants to be able to feel themselves and realize that they can't keep giving themselves away. They can't keep living to make everybody else comfortable anymore. And then I also work a lot with kind of what I jokingly call spiritual junkies, where the people that go from program to program and they're like, God, there's something fundamental that just hasn't changed in me still. I'm still dealing with the same feeling of I keep giving myself away and I don't know how to stabilize and get my thing going. I feel great when I go to a Tony Robbins event, but then 2 months later, I'm like, I need another one, And so these are the tools to help us just stabilize inside of ourselves to make it sustainable and concrete. And it's funny, I got this download almost 9 years ago, and I think I talked to myself about it for 8 years because I'm like, I can't believe like this changes everything. And at that point, my first version of this, I called Aligned Living, I called it the HSP solution. I was like, we all have this challenge as HSPs, and there's a solution here. Like our gifts can work for us. And people got so offended that I was saying that highly sensitive people need a solution. Oh, there's something inherently wrong with us, and so we need a solution. I was like, God, you're so sensitive. I'm like, oh, that's right. In fact, you're highly sensitive. I should have known. And so the name evolved. But for a long time, people just were in a place where they saw their gifts of sensitivity as their greatest gift was to just keep offering to others. And I think now the demand is just so strong from the world that people are just ready to go, I can't keep doing it this way. And I want my gifts to work for me, not to exhaust me. Like I just can't sustain this anymore. And so all of a sudden now this is becoming really interesting to so many people, which is exciting for me because I've been saying the same thing for 9 years and people are like, interesting. And now they are. Yeah, so it's exciting.
And I think more and more people are awakening to this aspect of themselves. Like you said, as you were giving us your story, you came from a history that was more conventional and you struggled in school because school wasn't a good fit. The way that you operated was not designed for our systems of education. And then you go from the bottom of the high school class to getting a master's in education.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're at a place where more and more people are waking up to it, even
Yeah.
within this last decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what's happening with energy medicine and frequency medicine, like it's remarkable. I have some clients who are leaders in that, where we're putting frequencies and vibrations and all the stuff with V cells, stem cell like cells that we can activate with a laser and put back into our body to repair brain injuries and work with Parkinson's. There's just so much remarkable stuff happening with frequency now. And it's everything. And so it's also communication. And so I think one of the things that's remarkable to a lot of the people that start doing this is they realize so much energy, so much of their communication. It's not just body language or the unseen things, it's actually the energetics. And when we align ourselves, all of a sudden now we can speak from a place that's just so clear and right from our core, and people hear it. Whereas before, if we're talking from the side of ourselves and don't even know it, and we're coming from this place, like our voice just doesn't carry, it doesn't hit. But the moment we lock ourselves back in, all of a sudden now our voice carries. Now it hits. Now it's direct for people, and people can feel the truth. So for people to lock in on themselves, like it changes everything the way they're received in the world too.
Alignment is everything. It's all
Alignment is,
about the alignment.
yeah.
And a lot of your work, especially for high performers, high achievers, I imagine that resilience is something that everyone recognizes that they need and can be difficult when you're always trying to grow your business, work that growing edge. How do you find that alignment supports that resilience?
Yeah, it becomes much more flow. It becomes much more clarity. And resilience, it's funny. I always laugh at myself and say, if somebody asked me before Aligned Living what my greatest gift was, I would say resilience. I just don't give up. I'll just keep going. And it served me for a long time. I had so many challenges. Like the only way I was going to achieve was to just not stop. And as I found my alignment, I was like, oh, the clarity to choose where my energy goes, the clarity to go, this is the time to accelerate. This is the time to settle in. This is the place to put my energy. This is the place to not put my energy. And we weren't in charge of that before. And so resilience was what we needed because like, oh, this took all my bandwidth and now I'm exhausted, but I still have to do this other thing. So I'm just going to keep pushing ahead. And so to be in a place where we actually get to manage where our energy goes, resilience is sure, like we need it, but we need it differently then because it becomes just the clarity of that doesn't get my energy, but this does. And before I didn't have a choice. I was just impulsively giving my energy to whatever felt like it needed it the most rather than what I needed to give it to the most.
I really love that clarity is a really fundamental part of
Mhm.
resilience and just not, as we
Yeah,
tend to over receive, over giving ourselves as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Empaths and highly sensitive people, we just go, there's the bait. Like, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. And really, another way we're saying is like, I'm going to manage this because I'm not okay until you're okay. When we live in a world where I'm not okay until you're okay, everybody else gets our energy because we need them to be okay for us to be okay.
Yeah. And a world that's really chaotic, right? We try to create stability, big air quotes around stability, by helping those around us be okay. If you're okay, then I can pretend this is all okay.
Yeah, let's reduce it to just two or three of us. You know?
So you have a book, Insight, Influence, and Flow, a guide for business professionals. I'd love to hear a little bit about the book, what called you to create that. You've already got the system that you're sharing with your clients.
Yeah,
Is the
yeah.
book an extension of that, or?
Yeah, my publishing agent challenged me to write the book for business people. I was going to write a spiritual book about all the energetics and all the stuff that was so fun and natural for me. He goes, yeah, you're too grounded. People aren't going to be interested in that from you. He said, I want you to write a book for business people. And so I started researching Heart Math Institute and Greg Braden and all the stuff and found the technology, the science that backed what it is that I do. And so it's really a science-based walk-in to the Aligned Living System. And all the tools are there, but it was really fun to go, oh, let me see how this reverse engineers. I know it works and I got the channels and downloads for doing it, but let me see if there's any science that actually backs what it is that I'm talking about. And it was all there. It wasn't that hard to find. And then after doing all this research, I just put it together and channeled it into a book. And yeah, and so it's a great companion because I don't end up talking quite as much from the science perspective. And so I think anybody that wants a more linear walk into it, I think it's great. And it's a great companion to any of the work that people do with me for sure.
I think we're at a really exciting age right now where science is figuring out how to validate
Hmm.
practices that go back thousands of years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Hallelujah, Heart Math Institute. And I just love geeking out with Greg Braden
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
ways that it stretches my brain. Were there any surprises that you found in your research?
It blew my mind how like I understood science and I used to be a science teacher even at times uh, but I remember Greg Braden he said at first when they discovered the human electromagnetic field, our energy field around us, that toroidal field that we create just like the one around the earth or around a magnet, they said it's 3 feet out. And I'm like, And then they did some research and go, well, how'd you guys get the number for 3 feet out? They're like, oh, that's what our devices measure. And I'm like, just the absolute short sightedness. It's at least 3 feet out. Couldn't you say that? But it was just in realizing, like, when science doesn't have empirical data, it doesn't just go, and here's all these other possibilities. It goes, and here's what we know. 3 feet. Your energy field is 3 feet out. And I'm like, can't we just put a little bit more logic to it? And so it's when we look at what's presented to us as mainstream science, which thank God is changing, but it's just ridiculous, some of it. The limitations and the stuff that's thrown out as an outlier versus the idea of like, well, if we're getting this data, it has to have some value. It doesn't just not exist. So let's explore it. And I think science is finally exploring it. And Dr. Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden and HeartMath, and probably 10 years ago, David Wilcox wrote this book called Source Field Investigations, which is just a compilation of all these scientific experiments that have been done that just prove that there's a source field out there that we're all tapped into. And yeah, I would say that the biggest surprise was like how science knows there's something more and pretends that there isn't.
I think there's a caution to feel like they're saying more than they can yet validate. And I also think that it's easy for people to overlook, thanks confirmation bias, the fact that the scientific process is what we know is only what we know until it's disproven. Everything that's been proven is open to be disproven. It's just as far as we've been able to take it to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just acknowledging that is huge, rather than talking about it like, okay, we've got results, so here's how it is. 3 feet.
I like the invitation to make it more experiential, to be able to say, here's the science, here's what they've been able to validate, and, play with this, stretch those edges.
Don't be afraid. Get curious.
Truly. If there was someone who was new to this and they're listening to this conversation and they're saying, yeah, sometimes I know things, but that doesn't really mean I'm psychic or anything. And, they're just starting to get some of those inklings like you were that time ago. What would be your recommendations to them?
I think play games with it. When we try to make it too serious or try to go, oh, I want to apply this now to win the lottery or something like that, versus just going, why don't I just get playful? Why don't I just start to play a game with, like, even just manifesting things like parking spots or just a fun, like, whenever it's low consequence stuff, it's always so much easier to do. The moment it's something we care about, we're in the way. Be playful, play games with it, and play games in places where you're not really that committed to the outcome, because the moment we become committed to the outcome, our conscious mind comes in and just screws the whole thing up.
A lot of time and energy is put into manifesting and affirmations. Do you feel like that tends to run into discord when the conscious mind is meeting that? Where do you think that people run into trouble?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, like, one of the first things we start to do with the alignment is we go through the consciousness lock and we do stuff to lock it in, but we also bring our awareness off the prefrontal lobe, which is where we problem solve or problem create, and slide to the back of the brain. And then we're much more just in this flow place. And when we're in this higher consciousness and in flow, synchronicities just happen like crazy. And if we're in here in our problem solving place, and I'll watch people as I'm working with them, we'll be playing with stuff and be like, oh, and then they want to take it and classify it and apply it. And the first thing they do is leave that trust and come back up here and then just start shutting down whatever it is that they're creating with the limitations of their mind. And I think that it takes some getting used to move away from that constant chatter that's going on, but it's so available as soon as we start to do the line living work, to just be in this place where I don't think that much anymore. I get really proud of myself. I'm like, I think I just went an hour without a thought. I'm really getting places now.
I'm so plugged in. I love that. To really be able to mute that thinking mind. Boy, it loves to do some overtime for us.
Yeah, problem creators. And it doesn't operate at a higher consciousness. It operates at a third dimensional discomfort-based consciousness, meaning that it gets drawn into whatever it's uncomfortable with. And so then it embeds in that and tries to solve problems and create from the consciousness of the problem. There's a great quote from Einstein that said, no problem's ever been solved by the same level of consciousness that created it. But that's what we do. We embed ourselves in problems and then churn over and over again, them trying to get it to be different. And of course, we create the same outcomes over and over again because of that. And so when we leave it all out there and come back here and look at it through fresh eyes, all of a sudden, what I was doing doesn't even feel like an option anymore. Like, why would I ever do that? It doesn't make sense from here. And it doesn't feel personal. It feels, oh, I'll just do this and this will work. And it does. It's pretty remarkable how much our conscious brain is just in the way, particularly when it's worked well for us to navigate the structures that society has. But we get to fly above that if we want.
Yeah, that's a beautiful visual to be able
Mm,
to transcend and to fly above it. Because you're making me think that that's that fundamental stress response. We're wired to respond to stress. That's how we've stayed
mm,
alive and evolved to being in this point. The thinking
mm.
brain served its purpose.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
with this evolution of more sensitive people with
mm,
extra sensory
yeah,
abilities, we
yeah,
can transcend that basic biological
yeah,
ability in
yeah.
such amazing ways.
Absolutely, and it happens in duality consciousness, which is third dimension's duality consciousness. And so, what automatically seems right to our brain is the polarity, the opposite of whatever that is. And so, I was joking, like, great, you found the problem, and so now what you're going to want to do is solve that problem with the opposite problem. Like, I've looked back at my life, like I was a teacher, and I was like, did it for a couple of years. I'm like, this is exhausting. I love working with kids, but I'm not making any money. Like, I'm tired all the time. I'm going to go into sales, and I hated the job and made a ton of money. And I'm like, this doesn't work. I miss kids, so I went back to sales. I'm like, isn't there somewhere in between? But our 3D mind, our duality consciousness wants to swing the pendulum to the opposite. It's like people that date somebody who's really quiet, and they're like, oh, I'm getting bored. I'm going to date this lunatic. Now it's exciting, right? Is there somewhere in between? Oh, that's where my alignment is. That's right. But our prefrontal lobe goes, I'm uncomfortable. This isn't good. I'm going to do the opposite. And we just create the opposite problem. And we can probably see all of our lives zigzagged back and forth between opposite problems.
Big game of pinball that we're all
Yeah,
stuck in until we can
yeah,
get some perspective on that.
absolutely.
As you're talking about your experiences and your evolution, as we've already talked about, you were an educator and you say you love working with kids. Have you ever felt called to develop a program that gives kids some of the tools that you share in your aligned living system?
Yeah, and I've done that. And I created a foundation called the Aligned Living Foundation for that, for 14 to 24-year-olds. And right now, I had a lot of life changes. I just moved again. And so it's dormant right now. And so I'm going to relaunch it again. But absolutely, yeah. Kids don't have all the years of baggage, all the years of commitment to doing it a way that never worked for us. They're just like, oh, this feels better. I'll do it this way. Where as adults we're like, but I've created problems the same way my whole life. I can't stop creating problems this way. I'm very committed to it. And kids are just like, that didn't work. This works better. I'll do it this way. They don't have the ingrained, so they make changes so fast and they're so dynamic. It's really fun to work with. And so many kids that just have so much anxiety and overwhelmed now. And so to teach them how to leave that out there and realize that most of that's not even their energy. Most of it's they're picking up the world's anxiety, and that it's actually pretty quiet and pretty mellow in here by comparison. And then just watching them go, oh, like I didn't realize. I thought this was me, but I was just streaming the anxiety of the world into me and thought it was me. And of course, adults do that too, but it's really prevalent with kids.
Yeah, as plugged in as we all are, especially our kids, they're so susceptible to it. So that's
Yeah.
so empowering. That's
Hmm.
amazing. So all in good time.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll launch
We'll be
again,
stay
but
tuned. I do think that the work that we are doing is healing the following generations. The
absolutely.
emotional vocabulary that we have and that then I learn they're bringing into schools and that students
Hmm.
have is just like we really are accelerating at an exponential pace. It
Yeah.
just helps to know the right things to watch to give ourselves hope.
Yeah, and I think they're coming in with such sensitivities that they can't do it the way we did it. Like a lot of us, I'm not necessarily speaking for myself, but most of the planet was able to have enough density that they could play along with our old systems. And the new kids are coming in, they're just too sensitive to do it. Like it literally is not an option for them. And unfortunately, our systems are slow to respond. So instead, what we're having is a mental health crisis for all these kids, but it's also forcing a shift in how we operate. And growing pains are a very real thing right now. And we are adjusting because those old systems are really destructive to evolving consciousness, and kids just can't play along.
Yeah, truly. That might be bringing some light bulbs on for people listening to the show. And reassuring to know that change is possible, that it takes a
Hmm.
long time for systems to evolve, but at the
Yeah,
individual level and at the community level where we choose to make our connections and stay
yeah.
engaged, we can be holding this space for that change to keep on.
Absolutely. There's a lot of schools that are making the changes. I used to work in an alternative school in Denver where, that was what we were doing. And so many people homeschooling, so many people combining to homeschool. There's kids just can't fit into those same systems. I kind of just survived it, right? We developed these coping mechanisms to just keep shutting down and shutting down. And I think anger was my greatest tool to make it through high school. I was just angry at everything all the time because it was just so out of congruence with me. And so I used anger to become super dense so that I could survive it. And then when I wasn't stuck in that system anymore, I got to go through the healing process of that. But it was my coping mechanism for being inside a container that absolutely was not of support to me or a match.
And now I believe you have that powerful insight in terms of what people are experiencing and giving them a hand out of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you guide them through that process.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very rewarding. And it's often like when we think about our greatest gifts and what we get to bring, it's the idea of being able to offer something that we most wish we had offered to us, and then to figure it out. I mean, that was part of when I created the foundation. I had this flashback when I was actually putting into place. I'm like, of this memory of coming out of an anxiety attack in a classroom, just going, God, if I ever figure this out, I'm going to teach this to kids that are my age. Because I was like college, I think I was like 21, and having a horrible time trying to reconcile this world that I lived in that I didn't know how I'd ever fit. And I remember making a promise to myself, if I ever figure out how to manage this, like I'm teaching it to everybody my age. And then I totally forgot I made that promise until I was creating the foundation. I'm like, oh shit, like I'm actually making good on this promise I made 20 something years ago.
All in divine timing.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love it. Let people know where they can find you. We'll have links in the show notes, but for folks listening, how can they plug in and stay tuned at what's coming along?
Yeah, so my website is davidwaldas.com, and that's a really easy place. I'm on Instagram too regularly, and I have a podcast of my own called the Aligned Living System Podcast. And so any of those, you can get on our newsletter too, because I'm always running group programs. I do work a little bit one-to-one, and I'm about to launch my academy training aligned living coaches to do what I do, which I've been working for 9 years to dial this system in and get all the new downloads that have been coming in the last 6 months, which have all been about stability and how to really claim our power inside of ourselves. And all that's just coming into a cohesive experience now. And so excited to train other coaches to do it and to train people to operate it in their lives. And so you can find all that on my website for sure.
Beautiful. DavidWaldas.com.
That's
Making those waves, sending those ripples out to create that change that the world needs.
Absolutely. Disrupting things.
In the best possible way.
Yeah. Disrupting with alignment. That's pretty good.
Maybe some t-shirt opportunities in there.
There you go.
Merch coming. David, thank you so much for joining me on the show. This has been a real treat. I'm excited to see what comes around the bend, to learn more as your foundation comes back on track. Yeah. It's all clicking into place now. Thanks for building that foundation and putting in the work.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on here. Great conversation, and hope it reached quite a few folks that can benefit from it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, absolutely. You too.
Thanks for listening. You'll find all the resources we discussed today online at happifiedlife.com, along with links to subscribe to Happified on your favorite player and a handy search tool so you can search all of our previous episodes. Help us grow by leaving a quick review and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, keep on shining.